I can't even begin to describe how excited I am about today's event, especially with these stars that are talking to us today. And the topic is so relevant considering what a stressful year 2020 has been. This pandemic has wreaked havoc on mental health and behavioral issues ranging from depression to anxiety, loneliness, suicide have gone up exponentially in the last year. So we're super excited to have Dr. Jay Kumar, and I'm even more excited. Sorry, Jay, but I have to say this. I'm even more excited to be introducing Gopi, who will introduce you. I met Gopi about 4 years ago at Wisdom 2.0. And the moment I saw him, I knew that this guy is a gem. And he says this jokingly, but it's true. I have clung on to him since then. It was exactly 4 years ago. I ran to the bookstore at Wisdom 2.0 and bought his first book, From the Internet to the Internet. And he signed it for me. I read it several times and I loved it so much. And one of my favorite lines from Gopi is that the cell phone is the 79th organ of the body. As a physician, I only knew that there were 78 organs, but he taught me that the cell phone is the 79th organ of the body. He has 2 MBAs. He's probably one of the smartest people that I know and one of the ones that I admire the most. He's the chief evangelist of brand marketing at Google, where we have had at least one event for Crack the Wellness Code, which was a super success with some of our other friends at Google. But we're beyond excited and elated to have Gopi as someone who will help us as a brand ambassador for Crack the Wellness Code. Given his interest in resilience, in emotional health, and in mind-body wellness, he leads yoga retreats for Googlers, which he calls yogalers. Love to hear from him more about that. He's been doing resilience work with employees in the employee wellness section at Google, and many, many more activities with super smart and accomplished people all over the world. So without further ado, let me introduce my special friend, someone that I admire from the bottom of my heart and want to be more like, Gopi Pillai.
Thank you, Pankaj. Thank you for the very kind and warm introduction. I have to applaud the amazing work that ICC Crack the Wellness Code has done over the last 30 months. So led by this leadership team, that is Pankaj, Somnath, Naren, Praveen, etc. What started as this movement to bring the idea of holistic wellness in the San Francisco Bay Area has now become a global movement, as you can see from the incredible audience that has showed up from all over the world. And what I really admire and appreciate about Crack the Wellness Code is the whole philosophy of packaging mind-body wellness in a form that is easily consumed by the general population. To do that, you have to really do two things, and that has been their approach. First is you have to find that evidence-based, research-based proof that some things work and some things don't. And this is a science. Taking care of your mind, body, spirit is a science, and it's been well researched over the last 30, 40 years. And it is the kind of evidence Dr. Pankaj, with his medical background, has gone dug into and is laid out in his book as well as in the programming the Crack the Wellness Code brings. But it's one thing to know the theory, it's a whole other thing to be able to practice it, to actually incorporate into our life. And this is the thing that Crack the Wellness Code is also focused on with these series of webinars. And now they're building this app called Pushy to help us, much as we know these things. Bringing into daily practice is not easy. And later, Dr. Jay will talk about the challenges of doing that. And why are, in some ways, we are even wired not to do the things that we know are good for us. Crack the Wellness Code has this incredible network of doctors, health heroes, health tech companies. But even more impressively, they partnered with other organizations, recognizing that if you're taking on this challenge of raising the overall wellness of the global population, then you need to partner with organizations around the world. And they really struck, besides ICC, which is the main sponsor of their organization, they also have partnership with iGlobal, with the South Asian Heart Center, Stanford Care, the University of Irvine Future Health Institute, True North, Human Center, etc. And I'm sure this will be just a fraction of what will emerge over the next several years or so. So before I introduce Jay, I wanted to share my own perspective on
holistic wellness, particularly during the pandemic. And it's absorbed from things I learned from South Asian Heart Center, from Dr. Pankaj Vijay's book, from Dr. Jay Kumar, etc. And my formula now, which I would also share with you, is to give yourself medals every day. Give yourself medals every day. Now, what do I mean by give yourself medals? And it's not exactly like buying these little piece of metal and hanging around your neck, but actually medals is a beautiful acronym, MEDALS, for what I have as a daily practice. And that is M for meditation, some type of spaciousness in your life. And Jay will talk about the benefits of that during his talk. E for exercise. Your body likes movement, our body needs movement. So pick whatever works for you, whether it's yoga or biking or swimming or interval training. D is for diet. And there again, both Pankaj and Jay will talk about and are big champions of plant-based whole food nutrition as the healthiest form of diet for the human body, along with water as the best beverage. So the D for diet. A is for appreciation. Live with an attitude of gratitude so that your mind, your brain, you shift its attention to the things that are working well in your life. L is for learning. Just like we need physical exercise, our brain needs mental exercise. You need to take it to the gym. And by trying to learn something new and complex every day, it works the brain in a certain ways and lays new neural pathways. And S is for sleep, and S is for some kind of a spiritual connection, some connection to something that's larger than us. So that's been my daily formula. Medals, M for meditation, E for exercise, D for diet or nutrition, A for appreciation or gratitude, L for learning, S for sleep, and S for some sort of a spiritual context in your life. But the best person to talk about a lot of these things is in the house, Dr. Jay Kumar, a dear friend of mine, and I'm delighted to introduce him. It's a privilege and honor. Dr. Jay Kumar is known as the happiness professor. This is what he teaches. He teaches happiness at Chapman University. But what gives him the credibility to teach that is that he's an applied brain science researcher and founded the Applied Brain Science Research Institute. And Jay has spent his entire life trying to understand this topic of happiness and specifically trying to understand what happens to our neurochemistry, what happens in our brain, what happens in our body when people are happy. And therefore, he's also, as an expert in behavioral psychology, he also tries to look at how can he change it, what habit changes or environmental changes we need to engineer in order to be happier. And this is what he talks about, and he went on to write about in this incredible book, one of my favorites, Science of a Happy Brain, that launched, I think, about 3 years ago, and is a bestseller. He teaches happiness at Chapman University. He's director of wellness at Chapman University. He's also got an incredible course on LinkedIn Learning on happiness. And I've had the privilege and honor of collaborating with Jay for many, many years and writing the foreword to his book. With that, let me introduce to you my dear friend, and in my opinion, one of the world's greatest experts on not simply happiness, but the neurochemistry of happiness, or what happens in our brain when we are happy, or what makes us happy. Dr. Jay Kumar.
Thank you so much, Gopi, and thank you to everyone here at Crack the Wellness Code ICC and also Thai Global for this amazing opportunity to really share with you some insights from my new book. I'll share my screen in just a moment with all of you, just a bit. But what I share with you is, like, I actually have a personal story about Gopi. So Dr. Pankaj Vij, I agree with you. Gopi is pretty amazing. He is big. He's a really fantastic person to talk about in general. But Gopi and I actually a year ago this week, Gopi came to Chapman University and gave, which I believe was his last public talk at Chapman University a year ago this week. And I was the one who introduced Gopi at that talk. So it's full circle that Gopi now is introducing me for this talk here on Science for Happy Brain. I'm going to share my screen with you right now, just to really, so we can start the presentation and to really begin to talk about some of the concepts that come from my book, the Science for Happy Brain. So I want to share with you what I believe are, Gopi said, I'm a happiness professor. When in high school, career counseling, there's no checkbox for a happiness professor. So how does somebody become a happiness professor? Well, I actually have been always interested in the brain and how spirituality and science converge to really help apply practices and tools for achieving well-being. But because we're talking about behavioral health, and because I know many people on this webinar have a South Asian background, one thing that we're really trying to do with Crack the Wellness Code is remove the stigma around mental health. So I want to share with you a personal story that really, I think, is the impetus that got me to write the book, Science for Happy Brain, and really begins to explore some of the deeper concepts that we can begin to recognize about how to cultivate deeper well-being. So what I'm going to say is, when I was 27, my mother died from suicide. It was a horrible, traumatic experience. I was something unexpected, but it was the impetus that got me to talk about and investigate the science of happiness and really begin to write this book, Science for Happy Brain, which I'll be talking about in great detail today. I also have an online course called Investing in Happiness, Improving Your Business and Work Through Brain Science. This really is topics from that online course I use when I present to Fortune 500 companies and to the corporate world. But what I want to say is, we can begin to look at happiness through the lens of brain science research. We can begin to explore what I believe is why we have to really focus on happiness in our lives right now and the science behind it. So I want to kind of share with you what I believe that 2021 and 2020 has been a perfect stress storm. We have experienced fear and anxiety about a new disease, and what could happen can be overwhelming. It can trigger strong emotions and reactions. We know that public health measures such as physical distancing, masking, staying at home can make us feel isolated and lonely, which can fuel our anger, anxiety, and addiction, which is the subtitle of my book. The belief that COVID-19 restrictions are going to be temporary generate confusion and despair. One of the things that we're learning in the brain science research is that when there's no end in sight, when something feels unrelenting, it can actually aggravate our mental health and our happiness, because the brain actually has evolved to really seek safety, security, and stability, three concepts we'll talk about shortly. But the point being is that what is also taking place is that many of us are questioning what the future looks like. They talk about, when is the normal coming back? Well, the normal is not coming back. We are going to have to deal with what we call a new normal. How can we begin to look at moving forward in such a way through growth and resilience? So I also want to make sure that we are aware that what's going on right now is what we can call trauma. All of us in some way, whether we are able to admit it or not, have experienced some form of trauma, whether that's through grief or loss. What's unique about trauma is that it can unfortunately present us to lose hope, inspiration, and joy. So everything I'm sharing with you today, we're going to talk a little bit now about what is the evolutionary trappings, if you will, or obstacles that might sabotage our happiness, and also go into some of the strategies we can begin to employ that really begin to cultivate long-term happiness in our lives. As Gopi mentioned, I have been teaching a happiness course at Chapman University for going on 9 years now. And in this happiness course, we really go deeply into what we call the 4 pillars of happiness, which are biological, psychological, social, and spiritual. And each of these will be discussed at some point in this presentation. So I want to talk to you about what I believe is called the rise in the disease of despair, what's going on right now. And this, you can see from this chart, this is actually came from The Economist. In 2016, The Economist had this article that they produced. And in it, they were looking at why is it that the suicide rates in the United States have increased. Now, I mentioned to you earlier my personal story around suicide for my mother having died from suicide in my 20s. I also want to share with you, I've struggled with my mental health and well-being, in the aftermath of that trauma. But there is hope in the sense that we can overcome what's going on right now. But this is a disturbing trend. What's taking place is that the rise in suicide rates are increasing, not just in the United States, but around the world. And they've actually shown that the largest increase in suicide is with the younger generation. There is, as an educator or as a parent, even for that matter, this is truly alarming. So what I want to share with you are some statistics that have come out of the October 2020's American Psychological Association. It is this understanding that on the right side, you can see over here, about 80% of college students or Gen Z adult college students say their education is a significant source of stress, especially now more so with online learning and technology. There's a lot of anxiety about the future. 67% of college students report there's a sense of feeling hopelessness or despair. It's almost like to say, back when, as administrators, our biggest concern is, how should I live my life? The question we're hearing now is, why should I live my life? And there's a big difference between how should I live my life and why should I live my life. A growing sense of despair. You can even see on the left column over here, 6 in 10 Gen Z adults, about 63%, say they have felt extremely lonely during the pandemic. The same number report negative impacts on the relationships. Nearly 3/4 of Gen Z adults report negative health impacts due to the pandemic, whether that's through disrupted sleep, eating unhealthily, weight changes. But 80% of Gen Z say they could have used more emotional support. So the work that I do along with my colleagues at Chapman University and at the Fish Interface Center, where I'm a director, we really look at caring for the needs of the entire person, whether it's the student or whether it is for the individual. So webinars or forums like this really are wonderful opportunities to advocate and to realize, number one, we need to remove the stigma around mental illness. More of us are experiencing mental illness, and there is no shame about talking about it. And so these will be more topics we can talk about maybe in the Q&A or perhaps later on in further conversations. I want to kind of turn now to what we call the actual evolutionary neuroscience. I want to really share with you some of the research which has come out that really begins to share some of the brain science, like why our brains actually have evolved. When people ask me, Dr. J, why do I feel, what can I do to overcome my anxiety and stress? The first thing I say is, well, you're working against almost 100,000 years of evolution. Let's talk about this from the brain science perspective. I'm going to go a little bit into the neuroscience, but I hopefully this will be at a level that all of us can appreciate. Nothing, I think, beyond from what we can perhaps, I think, for this audience. But my book, Science of a Happy Brain, goes into much more detail into the brain science. But I'll say this, if you look at the image on the right, you'll see the amygdala. The amygdala is a part of what's called the mesolimbic or the primal brain, sometimes called the Stone Age brain or the tribal brain, or if you will, the primal or the primitive survival brain, if you will. What the amygdala does is that the amygdala is where our stress response system is basically situated. Now, it's interesting. You'll see that there is a small, the hippocampus, which is a very small gland, which resides very close. In fact, it actually sits right on top of the amygdala. The point being is that the amygdala controls our emotional responses and helps your brain store memories. It works very closely with the hippocampus. The hippocampus plays a role in long-term memory and where we begin to remember these stressful events. Now, what's unique about the relationship between the amygdala and the hippocampus, as you see over here. It's called strong. The strongest, or if you want to say the shortest connection in the brain is between the amygdala and the hippocampus when it comes to remembering stressful experiences. Now, why would your brain do this? Why on earth would your brains like to say your brain is wired not for happiness, but for survival? Evolution favors you to be in a low-grade state of anxiety and survival. Let me kind of share with you an example of this. I want you to imagine yourself going back in time, say 10,000 years ago, and you were all by yourself. You were cold, you were hungry, you were tired, you were afraid, and all you wanted to do was to experience a warm cave, some food, some shelter, and to make it one more day. Now, all of us can probably imagine, survival was the name of the game 10,000 years ago. We actually, our brains or evolution, wired into our neurobiology a mechanism where we had to be in a constant state of suspicion, scarcity, or strife. We actually had to remember the negative experiences more strongly. It's a concept called your brain's negativity bias. A colloquial way of saying this is that your brain is like Velcro for negative thoughts. Your brain is like Teflon for positive thoughts. What does that mean? Your brain is like Velcro for negative thoughts. It means that your brain registers more strongly the negative experiences or threats in your environment. It had to. So you think about it in the context of thinking there was a lion in the bush and there wasn't one, or thinking there was no lion in the bush and there was one. Well, the latter could maybe mean death. But always thinking there were threats in our environment was a cunning way that nature got us to survive. By being in a constant state of low-grade anxiety or stress, this is how nature ensured our strategy for survival. There are some others we'll talk about, which are more positive, but this is the most, I think, difficult one. This is the connection between the amygdala and the hippocampus. The idea is that the strong connection is there. Now you see, but there's a weak connection between the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. This is the part of the brain where our prefrontal cortex, where we make our rational thinking, where we can rewire our brain. So there's a concept called neuroplasticity, the idea that our brain can rewire itself, but it takes practice. One of the biggest challenges that we are experiencing right now during the time of COVID is that more of us are registering or are functioning through our day through this primal neural mechanism, the amygdala and the hippocampus. So every little thing can seem threatening, can seem like a threat. We need to cultivate this other connection, which tends to be weak, but through time can actually be increased. One of the many negative attributes around stress and anxiety is that it creates inflammation in the body. Well, what's bad about inflammation? Well, in some ways, inflammation can be good to fight off a virus or an infection. But prolonged stress or prolonged anxiety, unrelenting stress, increases the pro-inflammatory response system in your body. The greater the amount of inflammation you have in your body, the more, in the long term, weaker immune system. It can lead to cardiovascular issues, neurocognitive health. So there are a host of issues that can result from prolonged inflammation in the body. So we are living in an age of anxiety. Anxiety presents itself in many different ways, as you can see here, whether difficulty in sleep, whether it's struggling to pay attention. You may go through these and see, wow, I kind of experienced quite a few of these right now going on, which is normal. But anxiety is something which is different than stress. Think about it this way. Our minds are this beautiful, amazing pieces of evolution. But unfortunately, our minds have a very easy ability to project in the future and to dwell on the past. Very rarely are we grounded in the present moment. So anxiety tends to be the anticipation of stress which is not in the present moment. So not knowing when we're getting a vaccine, or not knowing when COVID's going to end, or not knowing all these things are taking place can actually fuel our anxiety. But let's talk a little bit about, before we kind of talk about some of the strategies, let's go into what I call the brain science of resilience and thriving. We talked about a little bit about this, but here's 3 ways your brain sabotages your mental health and well-being. The first is change and uncertainty. Well, you think about in the context again of evolution, your brain actually evolved for seeking safety, security, and stability. And in the disruption of safety, security, and stability, our brains can go into states of anxiety. We abhor change and uncertainty. This is something that our brains despise, but this is something we have to get used to right now. And so there are tools, which we'll talk about, that can help us overcome the first bias, change and uncertainty. The second, your brain's negativity bias. I talked about it just earlier, but briefly to recap, our brains are actually more are wired more strongly, if you will, for negative experiences than positive ones. The third one, social isolation. This is something I'm going to talk about in more detail, but we're recognizing something about the human brain, which has just been discovered in the past 20, 30 years. And that is, your brain is fundamentally a social organ. And in the absence of strong social connections, your brain recognizes and feels pain in the same overlapping regions of your brain that process physical pain, which I'll talk about in just a bit. So let's talk about some of the strategies we can begin to use. The first strategy we can use to create the science of a happy brain is learn to be adaptive, not reactive. How do we train your brain from surviving to thriving? Well, that surviving brain, that primal brain, which is geared towards stress, mistrust, boredom, scarcity, failure, uncertainty, these are the things that can sabotage our happiness and our well-being, our productivity, our sense of joy, inspiration, and hope. We need to learn the tools to begin to go into a thriving brain: motivation, inspiration, cooperation, creativity, passion, confidence, and success. These are all possible. So the one thing I want to share with you is the next strategy is practice mental hygiene. Happiness is not a promise. Happiness is a practice. We have to practice the tools for a happy brain. It doesn't come naturally to us. Well, you think about this. Did it come to you naturally to learn how to ride a bicycle or drive a car or do surgery or practice engineering or write? It took time. So the same thing is true for any behavioral practice. And this is the key point about this series, behavioral health. Many of the issues that we're talking about here are behavioral health, are really around behavioral medicine, behavioral health. We can, by modifying our behaviors, we can begin to promote better health. So one of the things we can do, as I say, is by practicing some mental hygiene. We all know about the benefits of practicing proper physical hygiene, but practicing proper mental hygiene is also very important. So what might that look like? Well, the first thing I say is when your outside world feels out of control, learn to control your inside world. This is where meditation or mindfulness practices or practices that bring to the present moment. So what are the things we can't control? Well, we can't control the weather. We can't control if my technology just kind of acted up on me. I can't maybe do this, the slideshow that I wanted to do. We sometimes can't control other people's thoughts or behaviors. We can't control other people's actions. We can't control the future. When am I going to get my COVID vaccination? I want to get one, but I don't know when that's going to be. So what we have to do to navigate through these times of uncertainty and adversity is learn to practice how to control our inner world, our thoughts, our reactions. What can we control? We control our own behaviors, our responses to situations. Rather than being reactive, how do we be adaptive and responsive? You know, Gopi can talk more about this, I'm sure, maybe the Q&A being from Google. But one thing we're finding in the research, especially as a university educator and administrator, is the challenges that social media or digital technology poses. You know, I like to say we are disconnected in an overconnected world. Well, as you might see, technology is a good thing right now when we're physical distancing, but we need to maybe learn how to unplug wisely. I'll share with you a strategy that I do. I try to one day every month to take actually one day every week on a Saturday to do a full, today being exception, to do a full technology fast where I'm off social media. I turn my notifications off. I try to minimize even speaking. I try to really cleanse my mind, do some what I call some digital mindfulness. So learning even to maybe modify your social digital lifestyle to unplug wisely. Another strategy I really share with my students, which I think is really beneficial for us. Learn to focus on progress, not perfection. Now you're talking to someone who is a type A personality, who is really, really like just driven, to focus on perfection. But I have to catch myself sometimes. We need to really focus on what we call the not so much the destination, but the direction. So in some ways, you can say happiness isn't a destination, it's a direction. Focus on your progress. Maybe do one thing a day that maybe gets you to your goals, whether it's your health, maybe you're trying to diet, exercise. There are many things, even change your thoughts, your actions, behaviors, maybe meditation. These are all things that happen progressively, but over time, they begin to actually have and make a difference. Now, I know Gopi said medals, so I'm going off the meds. This is actually from Gopi. Self-care. I think self-care, we have to realize self-care isn't selfish. Self-care is essential. Take your meds, which comes from Gopi, his first book, Meds, Mindful Breathing, Exercise, Diet, and Sleep. If you can't do all of these, maybe try one of these. Maybe do one of these starting today. What's one of these you can start doing to really focus on in your life by taking your meds? The third strategy, get your daily dose of vitamin S, vitamin social. Vitamin social is vitamin S. Vitamin social nourishes your social brain. One thing that I'm finding that the COVID crisis has revealed is that in times of crisis, it reminds us of how truly interconnected and interdependent we are on each other. We need to learn to invest in social capital, whether that's in the corporate world, the corporate boardroom, the living room, the classroom, or any place in your life. Investing in social capital is the key. Coping with stress together makes you, the people you care about, and your community happier and stronger. Connection is really key. No, it's okay not to be okay. It's okay that you need to turn to others if you're struggling. Don't hide it yourself in. I think there's a really negative, I think, cultural mind frame we have, at least in the Western society here, and probably other cultures as well, where we have to bottle things up. There's a shame around maybe talking about our mental struggles or psychological challenges. So open up and talk about them. Know that physical distancing isn't social distancing. We can still be there with each other, even virtually. And remember, you're not alone ever. You're always surrounded by care and support. I want to share with you in the last few minutes we have what I believe is one of the most revolutionary findings to come out of brain science research in the past 15, 30 years. And that's the idea of the social brain. The idea is simply this. I want you to think about this. If you remember going back to the example I said about, imagine going back in time 10,000 years ago to our ancient Stone Age tribe dwellers. You're all alone. You're hungry. You're cold. You're frightened. All you want is a warm case, some food, and some safety, security, and stability. Would your chances for survival increase to make it one more day if you had one other able-bodied person you trusted alongside you? Well, yeah, the answer is yes. Now imagine if you had 5, 20, 50. You now have the basis of what we call a tribe. I want you to think about it in this context. We humans are not the fastest of animals. We're not the strongest. We're not the tallest. We can't breathe underwater. We can't fly naturally. So what is the one winning strategy we humans excelled at that made us the top species on the planet? It is our ability to form into complex social networks and navigate the complex terrain of our social environment. To socialize is to survive, to tribe is to thrive. Evolution favored socialization as a strategy for survival. Well, we know this to be the case for any physical adaptation like opposable thumbs, walking upright, vocal cords. These enhance human survival. So socialization is the same thing. And I want to tell you something. We really are not homo. We are more Homo socialis, social humans, than we are Homo sapiens, the intelligent humans. So an equation which still holds true today, going back 10,000 years ago, abandon from your tribe, the people you cared about. This made you operate from your surviving brain, stress, anxiety, panic, because you had no other people to turn to. When we learn to attach to our tribe, or part of a loving tribe where we feel a sense of belonging, sense of attachment, this allows us to thrive. So this really is very important. The social brain is, in my regard, which is the foundation for my book, Science of a Happy Brain, one of the hidden missing pieces that really can begin to help us cultivate the science of a happy brain. Here's a bit of a research I want to share with you, since I'm talking to, I think, to some of the science audience here. I want you to look at this image in the top, in the left-hand side. This is actually an image of an fMRI. Test subjects were put into the sophisticated brain scanning devices, and they wanted to measure what happens in the brain if we were to elicit some form of social exclusion. So they did this very fancy experiment where they tricked the person in the fMRI machine to believe that he or she was being no longer being able to participate in a virtual game of like toss the ball. So what they wanted to discover, what part of the brain fires when we experience either social exclusion, social isolation, loneliness, what we call social pain. This was remarkable. This study took place about 15 years ago. What they discovered is that the same region of your brain that experiences, whether it's social isolation, loneliness, social exclusion, is processed in the overlapping region of your brain that processes physical pain. The converse is also true. Your body has a system to regulate pain. And the same region of your brain that fires to regulate social pain overlaps the same region of your brain that regulates physical pain. Now, what does that all mean? Why would your brain have this interesting mechanism where social pain and physical pain are overlapping in terms of their processing and regulation? Well, it really is about this. Considerable evidence from human and animal research supports the hypothesis that physical and social pain rely on shared neural and neurobiological networks. Although surprising in some way, this co-opting of the primitive physical pain signal to indicate the possibility of broken social bonds highlights the critical role that social ties have played in the survival of our species. Let's put this in a really simple way of putting it. Your brain feels the pain from a broken bone just as equally as the pain from a broken bond. We are driven to have social connection. What COVID has done, social isolation, it has fueled that part of our brain that feels social pain. So it is real. It's not something just imaginary. It fundamentally boils down to this, the last two slides here, the need to be needed. There is no you without relationships and community. The social brain is driven by three primal needs: the need to feel value, belonging, and engagement. As you can see, the word community, the word unity is in community. And so the last slide I want to share with you, what I call the 4 C's of a happy brain before we go into Q&A. And these are the following, the 4 C's of a happy brain. The first C is comfort. Know that self-care isn't selfish. As I said earlier, do things that really bring you a sense of comfort, whether it's getting enough sleep, exercise, and diet. And you know what? These are things we have under our control. I know there are many things out of our control, but diet, exercise, sleep, meditation, these are all things we have under our control. Ground yourself in the present moment, whether that is through meditation, through deep breathing exercises, walking in nature, Exercise can be one of those, even playing with your dog or your kids, cooking, all things that bring you into the present moment and ground you. Again, focus on the progress, not perfection. The second C is contribution. You know why I love the word contribution? The word tribe, TRIB without the E, is in the word contribution. Contribution literally means doing things for your tribe. Know that the science of a happy brain is knowing that do things in your life that bring you a sense of purpose or a sense of meaning. You know, it's not in terms of work, it's not just about the pursuit of money, it's also about the pursuit of meaning. See the bigger picture to all of this. You know, what's going on right now will pass. When looking at the bigger picture, it helps us kind of put a cognitive reframing to see that life overall is still pretty good. And know that everyone has value, especially now during times when where would we be without essential workers like the Amazon delivery person, or the mail carriers, or the people at the food stores, or cashiers. Think about everyone now who plays such a vital role to help you made it through this past year. The third C is connection. Social bonding and shared experiences. That's what we're doing here right now. But know that this is very key. Create sustained community, and also reach out for support when you are struggling. And the fourth C is compassion. Make kindness contagious. Care, listen, empathy. We know we are really more wired for empathy and compassion than we are for enmity and for competition. Look at your vulnerability not as a weakness, but as a virtue. So again, the four C's of a happy brain, and we can talk more about this in the Q&A: comfort, contribution, connection, and compassion. And you can learn more about all of these in my book, Science of a Happy Brain, and in the online course, Investing in Happiness. So with that, I thank you for this brief presentation.